Hi, I'm Eugene Beaulieu. I'm an economist in the Department of Economics at the University of Calgary, and I'm also the director of the international program at the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary. I'm here to talk to you about CETA, the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement between Canada and Europe. So what I'd like to do in the next couple of minutes is to give you an overview of what the agreement is about, talk to you a little bit about what the issues are, what are the impacts for Canada. I'm going to tell you why this is an important agreement. I'm going to talk about some of the concerns people have, and I'm going to talk about the impacts of the agreement. I'm going to conclude a little bit with some lessons we can learn from NAFTA. So that's the previous to CETA, of course, probably most of you know, we had the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement and NAFTA. NAFTA superseded the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement. And that, at the time, 20 years ago, was a historic agreement for Canada. So I'll take some lessons from NAFTA and maybe apply them to CETA. So first of all, what is the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement? Some people have called it the third generation or the next generation trade agreement. And they're really promoting it as a really big deal. So why is it such a big deal? What makes it big? Well, first of all, the word comprehensive. The agreement itself, in some ways, is comprehensive beyond NAFTA. So I'll probably do some comparisons with NAFTA throughout, because NAFTA really changed the regional trade agreement framework. NAFTA, again, it included Canada, US, and Mexico, and it was a historical agreement because it brought in a less developed or a lower income country to a developed trade network that already existed, Canada and the US. And it was one of the largest trading blocs in the world. And it created a large trading bloc. It created a North American integrated economy. But probably it didn't go far enough. At the time, it went as far as it could in the political and economic conditions of the time. Things have changed considerably. And so the CETA agreement goes beyond that, because the world economy has changed, the way we do business has changed, and so the nature of CETA has gone beyond what NAFTA did. How has it gone beyond NAFTA? It includes services, and so services weren't included in NAFTA. When Canada, the United States, and Mexico negotiated NAFTA, most of our trade was in goods, and services weren't included. It's a difficult, trade liberalization in services really requires governments to agree on how to regulate services. Services are typically a heavily regulated sector, whereas trade in goods is easier. When you liberalize trade there, you simply lower trade barriers. Sometimes you get at non-tariff barriers, but initial trade liberalization in goods is really just lowering tariffs. That's really easy to do. Services is hard to do. So the CETA is comprehensive in that it includes services, and then it also includes a lot of what we call government procurement. So that's government's ability to purchase goods and services, and it gives Canadian firms access to a very large European procurement, and it also gives European firms access to Canadian procurement. And so I'll talk a little bit about what that means in a few minutes, but one implication for Canada is that it meant that because of the procurement and because of the labor mobility parts, that's another part of the comprehensive nature of the agreement. It includes goods and services, and it includes labor, and it includes investment in ways that NAFTA probably didn't quite go that far. NAFTA certainly didn't include labor. Some of these areas that the CETA includes are provincial jurisdictions in Canada. So the provinces, actually under the insistence by the EU, the provinces have been included in the negotiation process, much more than they were in NAFTA. In the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement and NAFTA, provinces were consulted, but they weren't part of the process in the way they are in the CETA. So CETA's a big change in the sense that it's comprehensive. It includes services, it includes labor mobility and investment more than NAFTA did, and it includes subnational governments. So that makes it a historical and unique agreement. It's also historical and unique for Canada because Europe is so large. The EU is 500 million people. They're the wealthiest people in the world. So it's a large, economically wealthy area, and $17 trillion GDP. So This would mean that Canada has free trade agreements in North America. We have an integrated North American economy, and now Canada would have market access in Europe. So really, the world trading system has become very regionalized. Europe trades mostly with Europe, North America trades mostly with North America, and Asia trades mostly with Asia. Now, of course, there's lots of trade between the regions, but most of world trade is regional. Part of the reason it's regional is because of these regional trade agreements. This would give Canada access to another region, and really a large region. Now, some people say that maybe Canada should pursue increased trading relations with Asia because it's a faster growing region, and Europe's really not that fast growing. Some people are actually concerned about the survival of Europe and predict that it will grow slowly. I would argue that, even if that's the case, Europe is a large country. Europe is important for Canada. It's our second largest trading partner overall, but we don't trade very much with them compared to the US. So if this agreement can facilitate an increased trade between Canada and Europe, that does bring a new market to Canada, and that's an important element of the CETA. So the big impacts could be, and the big features of the agreement are that it's going to lower tariffs. So tariffs are already pretty low, but they're high in some areas. They're high in particular in agricultural and some products, forestry and other products. So these tariffs are going to come down. That's going to benefit Canadians and Europeans. There's also non-tariff barriers, which are restrictions to trade that are not tariffs, but they restrict the trade of goods. Those are going to be reduced as well. What customs agents do is they have items that come across borders, and there's about 9,800 items, and all of them have a tariff line. And 95% of those are going to be eliminated in the first few years of the agreement. And then beyond that, the rest of them will be eliminated. So it's a significant reduction in tariffs and non-tariff barriers. The other big part of the agreement is, as I mentioned, there's a labor mobility part, a procurement part, and an investment part. Some people are worried about the investment part. So there's, you can hear and see concerns about the fact that companies can essentially sue governments under these agreements. Now, that is always the case. My view on these investment parts of these agreements is that it actually requires domestic governments to treat foreign firms as they would domestic firms. So I'm not as concerned about the investment part of that as some people are. And this is, again, where we could find some lessons from NAFTA. Before Canada signed a free trade agreement with the United States, many critics of the agreement were very concerned about this ability for firms to have recourse with the governments. They were worried about firms suing governments and not going through the courts, but through a panel, through a NAFTA panel. So those concerns are also raised with respect to CETA. But if we look at over 20 years of NAFTA and 5 years before that of the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, we don't see very many actions on that file. There have been some cases, but it's been fairly small. So in that case, I would say it's a fairly small price to pay for really what is a historic and important agreement. There's another reason why this is an important agreement for Canada, and I think that's more of a geopolitical reason. Canada is so dependent on the U.S. And that in and of itself, I don't think is a problem. Some people find it to be a problem. But we are going to always be close trading partners and investment partners with the U.S. because of our proximity and our similarities and our lower barriers of trade. What I would argue is that NAFTA really improved our relationships. You can see the dramatic increase in trade. NAFTA increased productivity and helped Canadian firms become part of a North American global value chain. So we actually became more integrated. We have a North American economy, a production economy, and that's really helped Canada in the current global environment where now we're competing with China increasingly and Europe. So the NAFTA really helped Canada, it really improved Canada in productivity and increased trade. CETA will likely do the same thing, but maybe not to the same extent because there's greater distance and other costs of doing trade with Europe. So it's not clear how far we'll go down that road, but we will increase trade with Europe. That actually helps Canada strategically because you know, the U.S. has become complacent, I would say, and maybe Canada has as well, in the North American agenda. The North American agenda, you know, NAFTA took us to a certain place, we increased trade, but we kind of forgot about it, and there's still a lot to be done. So when we say that this is a next generation trade agreement, why is it that? It's because the agreement with Europe will tackle services and tackle some investment in government procurement, so it goes beyond NAFTA. We should be doing those same things within NAFTA, and maybe with an agreement with Europe, that'll push that agenda forward. So I think for a trade diversification reason, for a strategic reason, these are important elements of the agreement for Canada, and a good reason why Canada should pursue them. I don't think the concerns on investment are as dire as some people make them out to be. And then I think, so if you look at how Canadians support this, you know, Europe is something familiar to us. It's something, they have common values, common governance structures. So we're confident in doing business with Europe. A lot of our previous trade agreements were with smaller countries, and that's okay, but I think the impact of those aren't as great. Now we have Europe. This is a big deal for Canada. It's important for Canada. And I think that's why when you look at opinion polls, 81% of Canadians support the CETA agreement. I'm looking forward to seeing the actual text of it. I know that there'll be further discussions on the CETA agreement as it comes out publicly. Right now it's an agreement in principle, and there's lots of work to be done to make it happen. But again, I think one of the reasons 81% of Canadians support this agreement is they saw that the impact of NAFTA was positive. It improved the Canadian economy, and it brought us into the global economy in an important way. I think CETA will do the same thing. Thank you.
Okay.